Hey, back despite popular demand, it's me. I'm going to quickly roll through the agenda, even though I totally assume that absolutely every single one of you, after putting your phone in the back, which is how the sub is going to take attendance today, has also gone ahead and completed the entry task. So right now you have notes.ideologies open. You also have made a new heading called Feminism and Democracy. And further, you have opened reading 3 because that's basically what we're going to get up to. I'm going to lecture. I'm going to explain your reading. The sub will play you the crash course on suffrage. You will take notes on both. And from there, you will complete your reading, which you'll also take notes on. Quick reminder that, on Friday, we have an open note quiz. So let's get going, shall we? First things first, let's talk about democracy. Democracy between 1955 and 1935 was exploding. An extreme expansion of suffrage was happening inside of this period. Over 20 years, the eligible voting population increased by almost 20%. There were 3 major expansive waves of democracy in the 20th century, and this era marks the first one, right? It was, of course, dependent on your location because... But you guys already all know that from Unit 6 when we studied suffrage and when exactly women got the right to vote and when over indigenous women and women of color in those exact same locations got the right to vote. But the first major expansion in democracy is in the aftermath of World War I. You'll notice that the amount of countries that score an 8 or higher on the Polity 4 scale goes up nearly by double, right? The next major wave up is going to happen after decolonization immediately after World War II. I'm not saying these world wars are good, guys, but the democracy that happened in their aftermath was pretty dope. Oh, and if you're wondering what this plummet thing here is, fascism. That's fascism. There's fascism. All right. So, basically what went down is that all of the major powers in Europe became more democratic. Not only did existing democracies up the democracy, but also a whole bunch of former monarchies, empires which fell, became democracies as well. Last over, many people just were enfranchised in a bunch of democratic countries. An excellent example of this is that in the United States, indigenous people became citizens. I'm going to go ahead and we're just all going to be quietly angry about that for a couple of seconds, that the people who have been here since time immemorial were finally relieved of their status as wards of the state starting less than 100 years ago. Cool, moving on. Back to the democracy, shall we? So, I'll get myself back on track and I guess on this map while I roll through the rest of the lecture. So the Treaty of Versailles, signed that big old treaty November the 11th in the 11th hour when the war is finally called off and World War II officially begins or whatever, did a whole bunch of things. The first thing that it did is that it made new democratic governments. Some governments that you've heard of, like Germany and Finland and Austria, right? Some you might not have, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, because they don't exist anymore. And others like Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. Those all exist. Right, great. The trick is that not all of the countries that the treaty created were in fact democracies. So one of the big examples that things changed a lot, but there wasn't always democracy, includes the Red Revolution. Tsar Nicholas was shoved into a basement with his whole family and shot. If you need more information on that, Disney now owns a movie called Anastasia, but history books are also pretty good. That did bring a communist state in an economic sense, but did not at all bring democracy to Russia. It brought performative democracy. In fact, Russia still has performative democracy. Come get me, Putin. Anyway, all right. So from there, even that was sadly pretty short-lived. In 1929, a major economic crash happened. It's so shitty, in fact, that you probably heard of it. It's what made your great-grandmother poor as hell. So basically what went down is that a whole bunch of American bankers made a bunch of very risky bets entirely on credit and crashed the American stock market because it was fully fully deregulated. Amazing. Well, anyway, so that spiraled out. The crash in the United States made the world poorer. And when people get like way poor and can't eat, they get wicked pissed about it. And that's where all the fascism came from. So that's how that went down. Cool. So next thing then, let's move on to the feminism. So feminism is usually divided into three waves. The first wave is in the 1800s to the 1930s, and it really does, for 130 years, focus on just voting rights and equal participation in democracy, right? Cool. But after that, the next wave, the second wave, this is going to be your grandmother's feminism, focused on equal pay, reproductive rights, the right to a divorce, basic financial rights. Like, you know, whenever I like rolled into the world, I was allowed to have like a bank account. Neat. So, third wave feminism, and that's arguably where we are now, although some scholars disagree and say that we have in fact entered a fourth wave of feminism, has really focused on sexual harassment, equal rights in the culture, and also intersectionality. All right, so suffrage was a BFD, like in the early 20th century. It still is. It wasn't alone, though. There were many other victories won. First and foremost, like straight to the top of my mind, directly above me is a picture of Margaret Sanger. Margaret Sanger is the founder of Planned Parenthood and is one of the reasons that, like, you know, reproductive care is in fact available in the United States. You know, she actually has a complicated legacy because at one point she wanted what she wanted so bad that she was willing to lie herself with eugenicists, which really just goes to show kids no matter how much you want what you want, watch out who your allies are. History will judge you. Am I history in this story? Neat. Okay, cool. But feminism's big non-suffrage accomplishments, because there are a shit ton. Suffrage, duh. But like also public health. There are clean cities with proper sanitation, and there's efforts to contain contagion. That's the actual slogan. The reason that this makes sense as a feminist issue, if you're not already thinking it, is that the people most likely to die from poor sanitation are women and children. Right? That's just who cholera kills. So, feminism also worked particularly hard to develop and implement child labor laws. I mean, I'm going to point out that it worked pretty well, as none of you have died in a mine. So, dope. Right? The child labor laws were extremely popular up until relatively recently, when we all pretty much decided that, you know, it's a super bad idea to have a bunch of children working meat processing plants. You're also familiar with, unions for women. Unions for women we've been talking about since Lowell. So you remember that in Lowell, Massachusetts, all of those girls had a union, and it was the first women's union in, the United States, blah, blah, blah. But most of what they did was look for safe working conditions. Safe working conditions, in particular in this era, were bolstered along by a thing called the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire, where basically all regulations are written in blood. But basically what happened is that a whole bunch of women were upstairs in a factory, making fabric, but the factory caught on fire and the women could not escape because the doors were locked from the outside. Many of them tragically died. Also, the women in that story were very, very young. So this went to Congress, their families were paid a pittance, a bunch of laws were passed, including some that you'll know today if you ever go into a business and notice there is a sign above the door that says, "This door to remain unlocked during business hours." That's why. All right, cool. The next giant feminist victory is actually restrictions on the sale of alcohol. Now, prohibition is the big boy on the block, and most people talk about that. That said, though, before this era, there was literally no restriction on alcohol in the United States. You could sell it to people at any time, at any age, at any strength, with very little oversight. And the people that actually suffered under this the most, the intense alcoholism of, the country, were, again, women and children. Right? Cool. In fact, fun thing before I move on to contraception, which is also pretty fun. We actually, aside from prohibition, we actually have 70% of the regulations on alcohol passed in this era. All right. contraception, and reproductive health. Now, all of that was part of the free love movement. The free love movement has been like castigated as like, this very promiscuous movement, but it's miscategorized. Allow me to explain. When it says free, stupid English, we got 2 words for free, right? Or we have free meaning 2 words. Gratis without charge, no. Free like liberated. So the idea of the free love movement was to separate ideas of sexual health, marriage, family planning, adultery, all of those things from the law. Right? But it doesn't require the state, right? Like family planning, birth control, adultery, those are personal matters. We don't need to get anybody like crime trouble for this, right? And so there's this chick, cool chick. Her name is Victoria Woodhull, and I love her. Okay, so here she is being rad in a cartoon meant to make her look evil. Reactionary political cartoons often serve to make progressive people just look wicked cool. So here's an early example of that happening. Okay, so here's Victoria Woodhull, like literally cast into the role of Lilith the demon. Right, with her sign, like, be saved by free love. And yet you see, like, just behind her, the burdened woman, poor, disheveled, hungry, with a useless burden of a husband. Like, literally, like, look at him. He looks very heavy. And her far too many children. Burdened by the state over personal matters. And here is the devil, basically. Like, warning her off. It's that narrow, winding path. This is a reference to Christianity. Like, really directly, like, the path that leads to heaven, right? So you have to walk by the free love woman and keep going. Victoria looks so cool, though, you guys. Like, look at her. She's like, man? Because, I look up the path and I'm like, yeah, that woman could use a divorce and some birth control. All right. But, like I've been saying, anytime there is progress, there is backlash. Every time. So, if ever you are going to be like those people that make progress, be prepared for that backlash. Alright, here, let me explain your reading, and then you guys can go watch your other cool suffrage video. So check it out. See this chick? She rules. And you're going to read about her today. She's on Money and Shit. Alright, so in this week's folder, you're going to find a short excerpt from Clara Zetkin, an outspoken German feminist, socialist, and proponent of increased democracy. Right? See, I told you you'd like her. Alright, so anyway. So she was so cool that whenever Hitler came to power, he was like, you specifically out. Well, anyway, she didn't like dying by firing squad. She went ahead and left. As you read, though, what I want you to do is I want you to take notes to help answer the reading question. Or questions, pardon. Include complete question and answer sets in your notes and then copy them over into the submission box. Basically, it's going to let you upload it to Schoology and whatnot, but, like, it's a jillion times easier for me to grade if I know what question you're answering. Neat. Further, your open note quiz on Friday will include all of the topics from this lecture, as well as the video and your reading. So please, if you manage to finish early, which, word kid, get it, I'm going to point out that 7 of you still have not turned in your World War I assignments, and because of that, your grade has gone down 25%. Please, finish any missing or late work, and I'll see y'all tomorrow. Bye, kiddos!